Talk Show. Yo, it's the Grown Kid Talk Show. Yo, Grown Kid Talk Show. Yo, it's the Grown Kid Talk Show.
Active time battle. Okay. When Final Fantasy Versus was first revealed as Final Fantasy 15, it presented a paradigm shift. Instead of being a variant of turn-based combat, this game is fully action-oriented. That was the first time a mainline Final Fantasy entry had ever done such a thing. Now, this is again a little incorrect because active time battle is for some part of the time period when it first came out, it was as active as you could get in terms of a game that wasn't like Contra or wasn't a Metroid or a Castlevania type of thing, right? That was as action as you're gonna get. There was no way to blend the two styles back then. Now we can get blends. Again, I shout out to Death Stranding for blending again. When you sat down to play a Final Fantasy game, it's like every time you play it, you can see what they want to do and how they want to show how to play fantasy. And what you want to do. You want to really see and throw fireball, or you want to, swing that sword or something. Fluidity in gaming is something that every developer is always trying to work on. Always trying to figure out how to take from what's here and put it in the game and make it feel so good. What feels good about action games is obviously the speed and the immersion. By having your active time battle, by having your turn-based, you do lose that immersion of being on a map in a world. That's just what that is. So we'll see. Given the relative success of the game, it seems unlikely they'll simply ditch it. I love the idea of given the relative success of the game. As if Final Fantasy 15 wasn't a massive, huge success. And it's not only a massive, huge success because it brought in so many new fans. And the marketing idea to remake Final Fantasy 7 to feed that new fan base that was like, damn, that Final Fantasy 15 was dope. Let me go check out some other ones. And what? This Final Fantasy 7's got everybody and their mother crazy hyped. I'm playing that. And this is what Final Fantasy needed, because there was a huge stagnation in Final Fantasy. A real stagnation in Final Fantasy on the PlayStation 3 with Final Fantasy 13. There was a huge, it was huge. The drop off in Final Fantasy players really cut after that. And I think they know that, and I think people don't want to admit that. A huge stagnation. So you had to come with something big. You thought Nomura was your guy. He wasn't the guy. And Tabata brought us something that really gave us a good starting point to rebuild what Final Fantasy can be, what it always has stood for: creative and innovation at every turn and opportunity. So with that being said, to say it was a moderate success is just as judgmental as hell. It's just incorrect to say. I'm glad Final Fantasy 15 achieved so much more than it gets credit for, and that's okay, because Tabata, I love Tabata. I love his art style, his direction, and it's touchy for me because the whole article here is just going back to Final Fantasy 15 and basically knocking the things it did in very short-sighted ways. Fine, it wasn't a perfect game. I'm just saying, to go back to an active time battle system, it just don't work. It just don't work anymore. Number one, class-based combat. Now, Final Fantasy 14 is doing this. Final Fantasy 14 exists. It's a huge MMO. I do play it myself. I love it. If you're not playing Final Fantasy 14, I feel bad. I'm sorry for you. And your criticism now, I feel like, is a little worse and slanted because you're not getting the whole picture. If you're not playing Final Fantasy 14, it's obviously, I think it's surpassed WoW in terms of player engagement. It's just great. Final Fantasy as a franchise has done much with classes in the mainline game since Final Fantasy V. That is a whole lie. they have done classes, Final Fantasy 14. Now, again, I don't give a shit if you have a gunner class, a blue mage class, a white mage class, and they're nobodies, and I just hire them. That's not the Final Fantasy game I really want to play. But it can be done right. No one's saying it can't be done right in the modern era. You make this an action-oriented game, and you give me my Dragoon that moves like Noctis, or you give me a blitzball player like Waka who's throwing that fucking ball everywhere. I think it's dope. I think it could work, and I think there's games that have done this action style too, and really dope. Type 0 did it. Where you had classes. Again, mainline, I noticed we're staying on mainline here. And Type 0, I guess you're not going to give it mainline, even though I think it, 0, there was a number in the title. It doesn't get the love, but it's doable. Since then, it's been pretty rare that the level of customization in 5 was present in the mainline, and class-based systems in general have been restricted to MMOs and side games. That's true. Currently, I'm playing Disgaea 5, so I see the appeal again, but it's obviously no Death Stranding. It's obviously no Final Fantasy 15. There's no real motion to it. They're wanting something that was 20 years ago with Final Fantasy 5. Like how do you please someone who wants something from 20 years ago? Like, how do you explain to them that that's not how it works anymore? You cannot just decide to go back to some of these things. You can't. You just can't go back in time. And Final Fantasy is one of those franchises that want to go back in time so bad. Thanks for listening to the Grown Kid Talk Show. Stream twice a day, and the talk show episodes will be out 3 times a week. I'm super excited. Thank you to all the new subs, and a special shout out goes out to the people helping in chat when I stream. Oh, it's so lovely having you there, giving me tips, and I don't know how I would get through some of these games without some of y'all. So I really appreciate that. Gonna definitely do some more things on the channel as always. Art, games, news, and gameplay. I'm the Grown Kid. Peace.